Welcome to Upside. I'm Dan Bowyer, and with Mads Jensen, we're both VCs at Superseed, where we back early stage technical teams transforming how the world works.
That's right. We meet every week to unpack what's happening at the intersection of tech, venture, and business in Europe. Whether you're a founder, investor, or just curious about the forces driving our future, you're in the right place. Just remember, this is not investment advice.
And today we've got the beautiful Andrew Scott, who's a little bit stressed. So we're going to de-stress him and talk about some very sticky topics. Maybe we can distract your brain with some... well, we're going to start with a happy story. I think a positive story about IPOs that may revive London. Now, the backstory here is that last year we only saw 6 IPOs in London, 23 the year before that. The most ever, just for some context, the most ever we've ever seen in London is 136 in 2014. But we've got at least, and I did a little bit of a scouring across the social web, it looks like we've got at least 13 that we know are making noises about listing this year. So hopefully we can get back on track. Now, Mads, what was your initial take on this story?
I think it puts a lot in context for us. You know, we talk about Europe and the UK and what we need to do to drive and create more value here for us. And as you said, 2024 was the worst year on record for London IPOs. It was even worse than 2009. And it follows 2023, which at that time was the worst year on record. That followed 2022, which had also been at that time the worst year on record. So we've had 3 record-settingly bad years in a row. And the city is in abject pain. The bankers, they were miserable last year, and it's not.
I can't hear any violins for that one, Matt.
Well, it's interesting you say that, and of course it's easy to deride them, but the flip side is part of what makes London great is the city, because it's a place where we can do deals, we can raise capital. Having access to those capital markets is a super important thing. If it wasn't there, where would you IPO?
No, I totally agree. And also, I think people don't quite fathom the fact that you've got this draw up. So we obviously all invest at early stage. We need this growth capital, and then we need these listings venues to draw up and then recycle. I think it's something that maybe the ecosystem doesn't talk about enough. We need that full financial stack, that circularity that goes all the way through. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Full life cycle. So the good thing, as you say, is we now have a pipeline of companies that are ready to IPO. Maybe a little bit disappointingly, many of them are spin-offs rather than startups that have grown to IPO status. There are a few good ones in there between. Look, it's not that there's anything wrong with a spin-off.
Yeah, Unilever ice cream isn't the most sexiful thing I can think of.
It's not. And to make our mark in the world, we've got to have an ecosystem that enables founders to start and build and scale companies and then IPO them to the world. And so the question is, why don't we have more? What's missing? We great companies, and we need investors that can back them. And we've seen amongst UK asset managers a preference for, maybe the smaller preference for UK equities in the past. We have talked about pension reform on the show here before, and I think it'll be a really, really important thing for us, because for founders who come to the UK and start companies that want to build into IPO, there's got to be the ultimate buyer, right, of everything we do in venture capital, which is the public markets. So there's still some work to do. But listen, let's take the wins. If 2025 is going to be a year where we have more IPOs and more activity, that's going to be a good thing.
And Lord Hill's reforms, nothing has come to pass after he published some reforms back in 21, I think. Nothing has come about. Effectively, he had 4 or 5, major bullets, which are all around creating more fluidity and enabling a little bit more, I was going to say, risk-averse action. I don't know if it's the right turn of phrase, but it looked like he was trying to come up with some ways to make listing much more attractive in the UK. But nothing has happened on that reform bill yet, has it? No one has done anything.
Yeah, we've got to be careful in the UK that we don't take sort of a holier than thou approach to everything. There was almost sort of a time when we said, we're the best in the world at corporate governance. We're the best in the world at ESG. We're the best in the world at all these wonderful things that, oftentimes maybe don't add
AI safety, AI regulation.
add value to companies and actually create friction that just makes it a lot less attractive to list here. And then firms just go somewhere else. And it could take a little bit of time for some of this stuff to ripple through. I think some of Lord Hill's proposed reforms make it maybe slightly less bureaucratic to list in the UK. So that's good. That removes some of the friction. but we also need the capital. We also need, asset managers to actually invest in companies. And so that's the other side. So there's still work to do.
Andrew, what's cooking on the IPO front with you? Is anything on your mind?
I mean, well, I'm an early stage investor, so what do I know about IPOs? But
you're genius, my man, genius. We know everything. We're VCs. We know the lot.
Seriously, it's always been a bit baffling to me why the city, the traditional financial institutions in the UK hate tech. And technology is the future of everything. So, luckily, I think there are people at London Stock Exchange, who get it and are passionate about the space. People like Neil Shah is very active on Twitter, right? I think he's head of tech and private markets. But we do need some regulatory changes. I'm definitely no expert in the public space, but sort of the free float requirements around, the minimum portion of shares that can be publicly traded. I think there were some issues around the dual class structure, allowing.
That was one of Lord Hill's reforms. I remember that. He was looking to make it more attractive for founders to retain control and ownership. Yeah,
100%. And so we know what levers to pull, but we're back to this issue of inertia, and the government just needs to force these changes, and people need to get behind it. We all know what needs to happen. It's just a matter of making those changes and biting the bullet.
Is it government? Is it not? Is it not like the regulatory bodies or other?
Sure, but the government has huge influence, right? And if the full weight of the government want to make that happen, I'm sure it will happen. To the point about the companies, you've got like Zopa, I think, $3 billion in loans on the balance sheet. You've got obviously Revolut with like millions of customers. So the companies are there. The question is, will they choose to IPO in London, on the Nasdaq, or somewhere else? I think the other thing that's interesting about if you look at the list of companies, is a lot of them are fintech. And you've got to ask the question, like, why is that? And I think that's because if you look back at 2016 with the Financial Conduct Authority, the FCA, did a number of things. They created the regulatory sandbox that allowed startups to test their products in a controlled environment. You had the open banking regulations that allow, encourage competition. And there was a sort of surprisingly pro-innovation stance from the FCA and the government, which made London ultimately, arguably, the global center for fintech. That's why we had all these challenger banks long before the US, and the banking system in the US is a mess. So I think one of the learnings from that, for me, is that it's sad that then the opportunity is being lost with blockchain and crypto. We have not seen the same approach. We had that approach. We relaxed the regulations. We put in initiatives that would help startups. And it's a bit baffling why they haven't taken the same approach with lighter touch regulation for venture capital funds either. It's just a no-brainer. So I think it demonstrates on the positive that government policy can really impact success and regulatory policy change for the UK startup ecosystem. And they need to create policy which removes friction for entrepreneurs, and the market will kind of do the rest, right? So I'd love to see that happen.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to stay on government and public-private melding, because I want to talk about that massive topic of what was it called? The long name plan is it the AI Opportunities Action Plan? I think is the full title. So this, in effect, is when you break down how many initiatives are underneath this one plan, I counted over 50. And this is Keir Starmer driving public and private energies, companies, individuals to get together and effectively push AI as a national agenda. And I don't even know where to start with this, because there are so many topics to unpack. I think just to throw in one soundbite that I read at the end of the AI Opportunities Action Plan, it was business as usual is not an option. So this is a soundbite from the official .gov website. I saw this first with Matt Clifford, who's part of our crew, and we know him reasonably well. So, Mads, where did you want to start on this behemoth of a topic?
Well, first of all, I want to start by congratulating Matt for pulling together what I think is a really, really great piece of work. I provided a little bit of input to it back in fall, but I think lots of effort has gone into creating what is a very important action plan for us to try and do things differently. We're not going to take a leadership position in any of these spaces if we don't make some concerted effort to do that. So I think this is really important.
Massively ambitious, right? I mean, the scale of this thing is just massively ambitious, which immediately makes English people or British people going, "Oh, it's never going to work," and be all cynical. And but it is incredibly ambitious.
Yes, yes, it is. Some great things. I think there's a recognition of the importance of government as a customer. We always talk about grants and grant money. I think the most important thing government can be is a great customer for technology companies. And so the plan creates this new structured scan, pilot, scale public sector framework to enable the public sector to adopt more AI and do that in a smart way. So I think that's really, really good. There's a smart emphasis on then scaling successful pilots nationally. So start small and then find ways to scale things up when they work. So I love it. Instead of taking sort of this, slightly, concrete approach of everything is going to be baked into massive national RFP processes that then derail, it's much more nimble. I think that's great. There's also a recognition of the importance of creating more data sets. So that includes something I think is really smart. For example, leveraging BBC data to create more national data for British AI companies. The plan is perhaps a little light on some of the details in some of these areas, but there's some great ideas there. And I think maybe something that could be done is it could create a little bit more guidance on where the funding needs to come from to create some of these data sets. And there are also some questions around copyright rules. So, for example, if we take really the national treasure that is the BBC archives, and we turn that into a public data set, is there a way to provide that on advantageous terms to homegrown AI companies, as opposed to just freeing it up to the whole world? So that there's some questions there maybe that need to be looked at. But there is an acknowledgement that data is vital, and I think that's great. Now, if we then look at where I think some of the areas of where the plan probably could go further, to be the most successful we can be, we have to attract the very best founders in the world. And that's not just something we're making up. If we look at the US, you have Sergey Brin, you have Elon Musk, you have Jensen Huang, Jerry Yang. You from Europe, you have Pierre Omidyar from eBay and the Collison brothers that founded Stripe, right, from Ireland. So amazing people from all over the world migrated to the US to start companies there. And for the UK to compete, we have to be a talent magnet. I think we're doing some of that, but we need to do much more. And if we look at some of the areas where I think we can do more, so the tax situation in the UK is reasonably attractive now in terms of capital gains for entrepreneurs, but there is a weak fiscal outlook, and that could possibly make people be a bit worried about where this is going to head. Is the government really going to keep taxes where they are? They're going to increase them?
But also, if you want to be an AI superpower, in other words, you want to win, you don't want to be reasonably attractive. You don't win by being reasonably attractive. You win by having the most attractive cap gains policy for entrepreneurs. That's how you win, because otherwise they won't get off their ass in Paris. Paris is biting at our tails in Europe in terms of the startup ecosystem. And although there is still more capital in London, it's trending in the wrong direction. And Brexit has really shot us in the foot. So we need to be doing everything we can and leveraging the potential that Brexit gives us outside of the confines of EU regs in order to make it more attractive. So I'm afraid, I don't think reasonably attractive is going to cut the mustard.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair position to take. I think you're absolutely right about Brexit, which is the other thing you need as a founder is you need access to talent. And we can talk to the cows come home about visas and visa this and visa that. Nothing's going to beat the freedom of movement we had, which is always going to be
something in there about
approach.
Visas. There was something in there.
That's what I'm saying. You can talk to the cows come home about visas, but nothing will ever beat freedom of movement. And the best thing we can do right now for UK tech is to enable this European Youth Mobility Scheme. If we just say everybody below 30 can come to the UK and work, it's going to make it so much easier for European techies and founders to come to the UK and set up. So you just do it. Don't stop talking about it. Just do it.
I love that.
I think it's a great idea. And then the third thing is access to funding. And funding is super, super important. There is great VC ecosystem in the UK, but we don't have capital to go all the way. And we talked earlier about the IPOs. We have to be serious about enabling more equity money, more pension money to be funneled into not just venture capital, but also the IPO markets. So it requires a complete change in philosophy about, Andy, to your point, how we think about tech in the UK. And I think if we can get those things right, so the tax, as you point out, the talent, and the access to capital, we can really make the UK a super attractive destination for founders. And that's what we should aim to do.
I was trying to work out where the money was coming from, because one of the massive investment aspects around this whole initiative is the infrastructure piece. And I found a few English companies. They were mainly in the south. It looked like there was about 12 billion going into infrastructure projects, so AI infrastructure projects. And I was trying to work out how much government investment is going to come in. I couldn't find any concrete figures about how much is going to be. I've read the 10-year plan, and I couldn't find any hard and fast numbers. But it looks like there's some reasonably big checks being written by a relatively small number of infrastructure companies. Does anyone know anything more about that?
What do you mean by infrastructure, like for roads and bridges? Or
No, I'm talking about data centers, tech hubs, but effectively it was mostly data centers with the companies that I found. And it looked like there was a big chunk of change going in, but I couldn't drill down as to what was being built exactly where. It's a bit like these AI, what was it called? AI growth zones. They're looking at developing regions where it's going to be much easier to collaborate, get access to compute, be part of this kind of public-private meld. But I couldn't, and the first one is in Culham in Oxfordshire. And I couldn't quite read in the paper what that meant. Is that a town? Is that just the number of tech hubs? Is that a region? Is there going to be some kind of tax breaks? Is there going to be, how is that going to work as a what was it called? An AIGZ, AIGZ, an AI growth zone. So I know this is the first kind of pilot area, region, whatever it is, and I know they're going to open some more. But then I immediately went into the fear bracket of, are they just going to try and then make it very equitable and fair and put them kind of where they're not really needed, but to try and increase employment or look after local communities? But obviously they need to be based wherever there's massive amounts of energy access, because that's the main thing that AI infrastructure needs.
That would be the policy pressure, is you spread the gold around. And we saw this with UK spaceport program. There was literally a few £1 million. There was peanuts. And then they took ages to issue multiple licenses. And then, we still don't have a medium to heavy vertical launch capability in the UK. They've got a bunch of spaceports. Like, why don't we just focus on one? Let's get one working. Let's just get one. And that would actually be the only heavy launch spaceport in Europe, right? Because the other ones are French Guiana, run by ESA. So, I mean, there is a danger that the funds they do find get spread too thinly. And I think there's also there's also a lack of acknowledgement of some when you talk about infrastructure, some basic needs which could improve the whole of the GDP, not just the ability to create an AI company. Like, will this place in like Culham actually have a working mobile signal? Like, I can be in central London and I get no data. I'm serious. And this has happened to me. It's happened to lots of people. I go from Cambridge, which is Silicon Fen, down to land on the train. I can't work because the Wi-Fi on the train's crap. You can't hold a telephone call because there's no signal. During COVID, I went all the way down from Rome, all the way down the west Italian coast, all the way down to Sicily. I didn't have broken 4G once, all the way. I worked perfectly the entire way. I can't go 40 minutes from London to Cambridge and work. So there are some basic infrastructure issues.
Yeah, fair enough. The trains are going to be nationalized now. It's going to be much better.
Some more public-private initiatives. Oh my goodness. Hey, listen, I'm not going to be a cynic. I think the other thing that I was, when I read Matt's content around this and then did some research and read the proposition, I thought this is our time to back this and be positive and not be British about this. I think this is incredibly ambitious and obviously well thought through. And my sense is that people like us should get behind this and find ways to support and encourage and be positive and do more. So my every fiber in my body is telling me to be a cynical old man. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to be incredibly positive.
No, 100%. And look, to echo Matt's point, I mean, it's great that Matt Clifford's been leading on this. I spoke to Matt and Alice 15 years ago when they were coming up with ES, and they've just hit it out of the park, right? And he knows as well as anyone the challenges of building venture businesses. So broadly, the short answer is it's all pretty good stuff. I think the challenges, as with any government recommendations or action plan, is how do you move the Leviathan, which is the British state, to focus around this singular policy goal, which is a huge policy goal. To your point, there are lots of initiatives. And the only way you become an AI superpower is if all policy is optimized towards that goal, not just these initiatives. So let's I mean, we could run down the list really quickly, right? If you look at the sort of the content first page, you've got like 4 big areas. It says be on the side of innovators. So is the government policy on the side of innovators? Well, they've increased national insurance for employers with no carve out for tech or AI companies. So that's a no. They've increased cap gains, another no. They've trashed the the entrepreneurs relief, which is now called business asset disposal relief. With the lifetime allowance going down from 10 to 1 million, and they've increased tax on venture capital returns for GPs. So I'd like to see immediately all those reversed for AI companies. There you go. That's a big. Then immediately we're back to where we started before that budget came in. So at the moment, I'd say universally, number 10 and Keir Starmer might be on the right path, and I absolutely applaud what they're doing and what Matt's doing is amazing. But number 11 is currently not on the side of the innovators. And then we look at investing, becoming a great customer. I think the initiative and the plan's pretty interesting. And actually here I've got some hope, because I think there is a huge, there's pressure from the military, there's pressure internally in government to be able to procure things better. And there's some good templates, like the US government's got something called OTAs, which is other transaction authorities. And companies like Palantir and Anduril and Shield AI and all use these, and it allows the government to enter into flexible, non-traditional contracts for research and prototyping and production. So like we need something similar on that. And then Matt, you touched on this, Nancy, you touched on this, of course, crowd and the capital and talent. Well, can't cover the capital. There's not enough, right? There's too little late stage capital coming online too slowly. And I think the number one reason our startups flip to the US, and the number one reason the companies in our portfolio flip to the US, is access to that later stage capital. You can access the US market by opening an office there. You don't need Topco in the US. But if you really want the big bucks, you've got to go native. And if we want national sovereign capability over AI, that means the company can't become a US Topco. So to your point earlier about IPOs, we need a radical plan to solve that problem. The Mansion House Compact is a great start, but we need to put fire under that hugely. And then visas is a no-brainer. Mads, completely agree with you. Just let anyone in under 30 who wants to work, or at the very least, anyone who's got an AI qualification or has worked in an AI company, you just make it super simple to get off the boat, right, and come and work wherever they're from. Then the last thing that you've got to build on UK strengths and catalyze emerging areas. I mean, the national data library is super exciting, right? To a point, I think we've got some enormous data sets, not just the BBC, but what about the NHS as the biggest data set, any medical data set in the world?
Yeah, but it's stuck on somebody's laptop in an
it's highly fragmented.
Spreadsheet.
It's highly fragmented. And so again, there's an argument to say we should get radical here. Maybe you should say if you want free treatment, then the default is you give up your data, anonymized, but you give your data up. Instead of opt-in, it should be opt-out. And the second problem is who's going to manage it? If you remember the big IT program, which I think was like back in 2002, it cost $6 billion, I think, and it overran
much more.
12. No, overran. The budget was $6 billion. It overran to 12 billion, and then 10 years later they scrapped it.
Yeah, that was just one of the contracts. MP Fit was a massive, massive catastrophe. But yes,
that's what happens if you get BT or Accenture or someone to run it. So then the question is, who do you get to run a project like that? And the answer is, you need a SpaceX or even maybe a Google or somebody, right? We should dig someone out and find we need Elon Musk to set up a department of Doge. I'm convinced that's a good idea.
Elon? Is it you, Matt? Are you the British Elon? Should put you forward.
Well, the American Elon, I think the point I was trying to make earlier is the American Elon came from South Africa. And we have to be a talent magnet. We have to get the best and the brightest here, wherever they come from.
I'm going to go sideways. I want to talk about Company of the Week, which is a super weird, sideways, colossal biosciences, rewilding, mammoth bringing, backing, weirdy beardy. So Mads, this is yours. It's quite a cool thing. Tell us more.
It is so cool. So colossal biosciences are effectively looking to make, well, not quite Jurassic Park, but almost Jurassic Park real. So one of their primary initiatives is the resurrection of the woolly mammoth. So basically they are leveraging CRISPR gene editing technology, and the plan is to integrate mammoth-specific genes into the DNA of Asian elephants. The Asian elephants, they share approximately 99.6% of their DNA with the woolly mammoth.
But don't we share 96% of our DNA with a banana?
And maybe they will make us into bananas. Who knows? But before that, before they go there, they will try and bring this woolly mammoth to life. They also have projects to look at the Tasmanian tiger and the dodo bird that has been extinct for several hundred years. So, of course, this raises lots of questions. What are the risks? What are the moral and ethical questions? Should man play God? All that stuff. And you know where I stand in all of this. I am completely unapologetic that we should pursue all this stuff. I think it's super cool. And I think we must try and do these things. And I think it opens so many opportunities, and it's so exciting. And I hope that they manage. And then, of course, yes, we should also talk about the risks, and we should talk about how to do it in a sensible way. But I was very, very excited when I learned of Colossal Biosciences. I think
I was reading this, and I just kept kind of asking myself why it is. And I thought, you know, what is kind of cool is once we get this technology right, the ability to maybe unwind or unravel some of the I was going to swear then, but some of the unpleasantries that humanity has imposed on the planet is possibly not a bad thing. And I'm sure if we ever did become a multi-planetary species, these kinds of technologies are quite useful. And I think it's also worth saying that 99% of everything that's ever lived on this planet has become extinct. So they've got obviously a massive back catalogue if they wanted to go down that path. Andrew, have you got any thoughts on rewilding and bringing back the woolly mammoth?
I mean, life sciences is definitely not my area of expertise. That said, coincidentally, I was talking to a founder just earlier this week about molecules which are chiral, which means they have a mirror image. And listeners may remember the thalidomide drug back in the day, which was a terrible tragedy for many. And one of the reasons that mistake was made is because people assumed that these molecules that had a mirror image, that they behave the same way. And thalidomide, its chirality was important because one side was effective in doing what it was supposed to do. The other side, the flipped side of the molecule, the mirror image, was actually toxic, which caused all the problems. And the reason why I think that's relevant is because you're not really recreating woolly mammoths. You're creating it's hybridization. You're creating a hybrid animal. You said it's going to be part.
Yeah, you're not fully going back. This is going to be effectively.
Exactly. And so you really are in an area.
They don't have all the DNA, do they? They don't have the entire sequence. Yeah.
So you're in an unknown area, and it's extremely hard to predict what the consequences of that are. So I think that's very worrying. I think it's fascinating. I mean, it's definitely, the concept of a Jurassic Park is both super cool but terrifying. But I do think it is an area that's inevitable, yet it does require super close regulation. And the other problem is, of course, that this stuff's getting easier and easier. I mean, you can already create a bioweapon using a machine you can buy that will fit in a garage. So, or garage for British listeners.
Garage.
So yeah, interesting, but I dread what we might accidentally do or damage we might accidentally cause.
Yeah, interesting, but I think is possibly should be what the podcast is called. Another super sideways left field, right field switch. I don't know why, if I've been listening out for this particular topic that I want to talk about next, but I've been stumbling upon this notion of natural hydrogen or white hydrogen as an energy source. And maybe over the last month or so, I've come across a podcast, read an article, and obviously hydrogen, I think it's the most prevalent molecule in the universe. And we all know the H in H2O is hydrogen. You can pump an electric current through water to get hydrogen and oxygen. And it's just a really abundant energy source. And they have found some big pockets in Mali, Australia, Russia, and the US. And my brain as a VC immediately went, is there an opportunity here to create should startups or should the investment ecosystem be looking at hydrogen as part of the set of renewables, because it's no carbon mining. So obviously when you burn it, you get out your exhaust pipe. If you burn it in your car, you'll get water. So it's an extremely abundant available energy source. So could it be part of the pack that then goes with whatever PVs or geothermal or wind or whatever it might be to be part of our energy set? So possibly a very short conversation here, gents, because everything that I can read about it is extremely nascent. I found a couple of UK firms that have raised some capital to look at white hydrogen, because I think there's grey, blue, green. There are other hydrogen types which tend to be the outcomes of other chemical reactions. We know we can create it. We know I think it was Toyota were looking at hydrogen fuel cells very actively until very recently. So it's kind of in our vocabulary. But is there an opportunity for startups to look at hydrogen, do we think?
Well, yeah. So I think you were specifically raising white hydrogen
Yes.
as a
Just the
possibility.
natural, yes.
And from a physics perspective, it's really interesting, but there are just massive challenges in using it. And it's not obvious that it's close to any form of widespread commercialization or any commercialization at all. I mean, despite the newfound deposits, there are still relatively few known deposits, and there are just massive difficulties in storage and transportation. And you can't use any existing natural gas infrastructure. You have to make completely new infrastructure to store and transport this.
I read about this. You can, as long as you blend. You can't naturally, but if you blend it, you can.
Yeah, because the problem is that these hydrogen molecules, they're super small. And so containment is tricky. They can penetrate, they can escape through many metals.
And it's quite damaging, isn't it?
Well, that's one thing. So they can escape. They also tend to embrittle metals by infiltrating their crystalline structure. And so they have a very low density. So that means you have to have either a very very low temperature or extremely high pressure. This seems to me like another blind alley. I mean, of course, you should explore all of these avenues, but to me, it seems like right now we need more nuclear and we need more renewables. And that's where we should be focusing the bulk of our efforts.
I'm keeping a particular eye on gold hydrogen in Australia. That sounds like another variant of hydrogen. It's not. It's a company called Gold Hydrogen. They've raised, if memory serves, around $20 million. And it looks like they're quite close to finding big pockets and working out the tech set to then create some of the supply chain to get it out and into the infrastructure. So I'm going to keep an eye. Maybe we'll come back and be talking about investing in hydrogen startups. But Andrew, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on energy, because one of the big topics that Mads and I have been talking about off cameras is energy. So that maybe that's what kind of sparked my brain. But anything on hydrogen or energy for you?
Broadly, for the immediate challenges, I'm with Mads. I mean, I think we've got to look at how do we better leverage sort of existing energy resources. But I think we will have a blend, because different energy types are appropriate for different uses.
Use cases.
And so we backed Beyond Aero, which is hydrogen, which is a sort of medium range, 1,100 mile plus private jet built from the ground up as a hydrogen aircraft, which was the insight they had, which we felt would give them the edge. Although there are a bunch of other companies doing conversion for existing aircraft with hydrogen. For smaller aircraft like eVTOLs and drones and air taxis, and actually 2 to 4 seater aircraft, you're already seeing electric aircraft come online, which is super interesting. And we've backed a company called Aerovolt, which is building the software hardware infrastructure for that globally. And the first move to do that, and they've already rolled out 7 airfields across the UK. I'm no expert on hydrogen itself. My understanding is that, as Mads says, we don't know where it is. A lot of the white hydrogen, the concentrations are unknown, like mixed with other gases, and there are no proven extraction methods. So that sounds like a lot of different ifs and buts and a few years to go to extract it. And hopefully the industrial processes to create other types of hydrogen will improve meanwhile. And of course, there's delivery infrastructure as well. So you do need to either do the blend or have new delivery infrastructure. But
yeah, maybe it's a step too far. Maybe it is.
The other thing I'm very hopeful of, in the context of going back to the AI action plan and AI in general sucking up so much energy, I'm very confident in the next 3 to 5 years, we will see some very exciting shifts in the classical computing architecture for computer processors. Computer processors get hot and they use a lot of energy because they throw data away. But if you use something like reversible computing, which is a whole new paradigm for computing, and I hate that word, but this really is the right word for this shift, you no longer throw the data away. The calculations become reversible, so you don't produce the heat, which means you can have chips that are theoretically up to 4,000 times more energy efficient. So if we see some of these things start to come to market, then both that change and hopefully the eventual discovery of, fusion energy that's efficient and effective, I think we'll be in a good state. I'm actually less worried about the energy crisis than some of the other more fundamentals of climate issues, because I think we're on a good track to solve some of those from both ends, from having more powerful processes that use less energy, but also more efficient ways of generating energy.
Yeah, Mads, you're on the same tip as Andrew, aren't you, on the energy piece? You reckon we'll crack it?
Technologically, I have no doubt. I worry that energy is so expensive in the UK, in Europe. I worry that we're underinvesting a little bit, and we're not thinking strategically enough about the importance of getting enough of the right type of energy to where we need it. So I'd love to see a much, much more aggressive stance on investment into energy to make sure we have abundant energy for our industry, for our businesses at the right price point.
We just need more strategic thinking, full stop. I mean, across political leadership, that's the problem. That's why we've got a war in Europe. That's why we don't have a big AI company. All these things. We need better long-term thinking and ways of making policy that doesn't get reversed 4 years later or 5 years later at the next election.
Yeah, remove some of the politics from it. Well, there is some other great news from across Europe, because we're going to be super optimistic and super positive in this episode. And it was Joram Wingard's, he's the CEO of Dealroom. He was looking at enterprise value in Europe over the last 10 years. It was maybe even 20 years compared to the States. And it's gone from 5, I think, to about 20%. So we are producing really smart things in Europe, and we are producing more value. Now, this is one of yours, Mads. Where should we take this?
Yeah, I mean, we often look at the behemoths of technology and say, oh gosh, we got no Amazon in Europe. We've got no Google in Europe. And that's true. We don't. Many of the companies we look at, they were created in the 90s or very early 2000s. And if you look at that time, there really wasn't much of a European tech sector. And so what Joram and his team over at Dealroom have done is they have crunched the numbers of the value created by technology companies for each of the 5-year periods since 1990. And so in the 1990s and then the early 2000s, there was very little European tech. And so Europe's share of global tech enterprise value. So if you look at the companies that were created in that period, and if you fast forward to today, the European value was less than 10%. As you said, I think, Dan, kind of about 5% in the 90s.
About 5.
But if we then fast forward to the last few years, so take the period from 2015 to 2019, so that 5-year period, the total value of all tech companies created in that period is $6.3 trillion today. And of these, the European contribution was 19%. So in those decades, we've gone from 5% to 19%, which isn't leadership, but it's certainly not nothing either. And if we can continue that trajectory, it's not shabby at all. So it's lovely to see.
Well, I think the team at Dealroom do a great job of promoting Europe and tracking Europe. Thank God for them. It's great. First of all,
I saw Pete from Carter have a pop. I mean, they did a bit of a naughty thing with the graphic when I saw the report. They hadn't normalized the figures, so Europe was look super healthy and attractive, and actually when you normalize the figures, Europe was kind of down here, and the States was massive in the trillions. But yeah, so Peter from Carter did have a little bit of a pop at Europe, because I think obviously they're competitors. But yeah, sorry, you were saying
it's all trending the right way. It's just not trending fast enough, and that matters perhaps less when we're talking about SaaS companies and yet another fintech. But it really matters when you're talking about controlling and owning and having national sovereignty over AI or space. And I think that's the thing that keeps me awake at night, which is, how do we accelerate this and really focus the capital that is there and the initiatives around the stuff that really matters, which is our security, ultimately.
Gentlemen, what else is on your mind? Andrew, have we de-stressed you, by the way? Are you more or less stressed? Has this been a good chat?
What can I say? This is like a massage in a warm bath. What can I say?
A warm bath in what? I won't ask you. But what else is on your mind, Andrew? What else has been happening for you this week?
It's good. Well, as a man who's raising his fund 3, that still goes on. Doesn't happen, as you know, over a couple of weeks. It's months. So that's all good. We've got a bunch of companies in market raising. Actually, Bear had some great coverage, and I mentioned there because we're just talking about reversible computing. It just so happens that's exactly what they do. They've got a well-winning team. They got coverage in IEEE Spectrum, which is, if you're into that world, then that's a very specialist magazine, but they've had coverage in Wired.
How do you learn about these new topics? What's your, I mean, obviously GPT and other LLMs can help and accelerate some of that kind of gathering and contextualizing of information, but it must take a lot of your time to go off and research these topics, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. The answer really is that I'm never going to be the expert. And hopefully, if you back the right founder, the founder's always going to be the expert. So my job is to work out whether they're solving a big enough problem. And then if the value, the step change comes from the technology, is to go and find experts who will educate me to ask the right questions. And the founders will give us, and the technical team will give us answers to those questions. And we've simply got to work out whether we believe them or whether they're compelling and whether they stack up. And so we draw on our network to do that. We draw on academia, and we draw on research. Sometimes the research actually ends up coughing up the company or the founder you want to invest into. 7 years ago, I wanted to look at investing in a quantum computing company. Part of my research, I was watching a video with Winfried Hessinger from the Sussex University presenting to the US Department of Energy, talking about a blueprint for a scalable quantum machine, because I wanted to learn about quantum and the challenges about scaling a quantum machine. Afterwards reached out to him and said, are you thinking about starting a company? Because this looks like a really great strategy you've got here. And he said, yes, I actually am. So wind forward 2 years, we helped them spin out of Sussex, and that's now a fantastically performing portfolio company who you will hear a lot more of and about in about a year's time. So yeah, it's always a challenge, but it hopefully keeps me alive and kicking.
I think it's one of the most joyful things about what we do is the ability to meet these people that are doing these incredible things and learn these new topics.
As a deep tech investor, we've been doing it over 10 years, but I can't think of a single company that failed because they couldn't build the technology. It's always because of the people. It's because they're out of money, because they didn't focus on, the sales and marketing soon enough. So it's always a problem.
Even in deep tech, interesting.
Even in deep tech.
Mads, what's cooking for you? Anything been on your mind this week that you wanted to share?
Well, it's all change in Washington, isn't it? And Big Orange Man is taking over next week. And TikTok may or may not survive.
Well, it looks like they will.
The Supreme Court has said that they don't really care for their defense. But Trump has said that he's trying to strike a deal with Shein to do something that doesn't amount to closing the platform.
I wonder what he's giving away. Energy's on my mind this week. Finding founders, talking with teams in energy. I think that's going to be a big recurring theme for me in 25. So I'm sure
You're looking to do an investment?
Yeah, I was looking. There's something that's nagging away at me, and maybe it's all this, compute requiring all this energy. I don't know what it is, but there's something about if we just get the energy piece cracked in the UK, I think there's lots of magic to be had, and lots of, I'm massively. Many years ago, I wanted to set up a micro generation company, so making houses completely energy independent, and the tech wasn't quite there yet, and the PVs weren't quite efficient enough, and battery technology wasn't quite there yet. And I've had that kind of interest ever since then, and now working with you fine people and looking at what we do, there's something, and obviously with AI and everything that is coming kind of topically, there's so much to do with energy that really excites and enthuses me.
I've got a great fusion company you should look at.
Okay, well, let's
talk
turkey, baby.
I can't tell you what it is.
You'll have to kill me after you tell me.
Yeah, you have to talk to Jeff very nicely, and maybe he'll tell you.
Okay.
I can't.
Listen, it's been lovely.
I'll get killed.
I will definitely have that chat with you. It's been lovely chatting. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you next week.
Pleasure's all mine.